Hello, this is Randy with Excel for Freelancers, and welcome to the Double Drill Down training. I'm going to show you how to create this incredible customer balance report, complete with one-click invoice preview, one-click go to the invoice, along with a fully dynamic date range drop-down list. And we're going to do it all from scratch, starting with an empty worksheet. It's a training you won't want to miss, so let's get started. All right, thanks so much for joining us today. I've got a completely from scratch training that you are just going to love, the double drill down. We're going to do this customer balance report. We're going to create it all from scratch. However, this is actually built in our mini accounting application. So when you download this, it's already going to come with all of these features. We've got a dashboard here. I've got incredible order items and databases and customer balances and a whole lot on this. So you might want to grab this the mini accounting application was a training that we did before. So that was quite a while ago, but I'll include the link down below if you want to see how we created this mini accounting application. We've just added something called the customer balances to this, right? This is completely separate. So even if you haven't seen any prior trainings, no worries. We're starting from a blank worksheet and of course the data we created. So it's going to be completely from scratch. I'm going to show you how to create this double drill down. So we're going to drill down on customers. Then we're going to drill down on those invoices created. And then we're going to be able to see the items within that invoice. We'll be able to select and preview that invoice. We'll be able to go directly to it, complete with this order management system, which we had in the original mini accounting. And that all comes complete with transactions, dashboard, and admin, inventory, and orders. So this time we're focusing on the customer balance. So this is a brand new sheet. All right, go ahead and download this using the links below. If you do like these trainings, all I ask you to do is just a few things. Go ahead and click that subscribe. Make sure you like, and of course the notification icon bell, and comment below. That helps us out. I do appreciate all of your involvement. There's many ways you can support our channel. One of them is with our Patreon platform. Now, Patreon platform, if you have a feature you wanted to add to one of these trainings, or you want to be able to fix something, or you want me to focus on something, I'm doing that all on our Patreon platform. For example, the last week we created this really incredible fitness tracker. We had some suggestions on it. So now we added a completion percentage and we added exercise instructions, one click, and we're able to delete instruction. And we have this really cool monthly progress. So we added all of that, and all those additional features are on our Patreon platform. So I'll urge you just a few dollars a month, and you can get extra features, whatever you choose. You can get them added to this application. So it's really great. That's just one of many things we'll be doing. In fact, with this, of course, double drill down that we're doing, we are also going to have your suggestions, your features on our Patreon. Now, Patreon platform also comes with unreleased features and trainings. It comes with PDF codebooks, early bird discounts, supporting training resources like pictures and icons, and it also comes full video downloads. So if you don't have internet, you can download the entire training videos, and member discounts, and a whole lot more. So I hope you'll join us there on Patreon. All right, so what we're going to be doing this week here is we're going to be creating this double drill down customer balance report from scratch. We'll be able to click a button, refresh it. We'll be able to select a specific date range if we want to, and we'll be able to select on individual customers and have the customer invoices within that period show up. We'll be able to select on an invoice. We'll be able to preview that invoice. We'll be able to select and expand and know what items were in that invoice if we want to. And we're going to be able to all do with a single click. So that's what we're going to be creating. We're going to be starting out with a blank worksheet. So let's go ahead and I'm going to move this over to the side, and I've got a blank worksheet. We're going to close this out. We don't need that anymore. And we're going to be starting with this blank worksheet. Now, this is also built into, of course, the same application, right? We still have our orders. We're going to be focused on some databases, right? So we have each time we create these orders, we have several order types. We have invoices, so we can add an estimate, work order, invoice, or purchase order. In our data, we're only going to be focused on invoices, right? We want to focus on customer balance. So in our order database here, we have all those orders. We have order date, a status, an account, an item, right? These are the order items, right? Individual items. This is the order database. So we have the order ID, the order type. Now we're only going to be focused on invoice orders. So keep that in mind. All the data that we want inside this customer balance report is only going to be those invoices within a given date period. So for example, if that date falls in the date period in our date range, we will be able to add it in based on that. We'll have the customer name here, and then we'll have, of course, the total, the balance, right? If there's any payments and any payments that have been applied. And so my goal is to list all the items, all the orders or invoices. An invoice is a specific type of order. If we see here, we've got an order. This is an invoice type order, right? We've got the order items, we have the total. So I want this information in our customer balance sheet. So we're going to create that right now. So the first thing what I want to do is I'm going to use columns A and B. These are going to be for our admin. We're just going to have a few items in there, so we're not going to do much. I'm going to drop this down. I'm going to pin it right here, so that way we can see what we're doing. And I'm just going to give it a, let's say, a gray color, right? We're using just a theme. So these columns are really going to be just for admin. We only have a few other things. And the first thing what I want to do is I want to put in a title inside our customer balances. So we're going to drop this down here, and I want to put in our double drill down. So we're going to call this double drill down, okay? And then I want to give it a subtitle called Customer Balance Report. So Customer Balance Report. Okay, and we'll give it a little top theme color here. Now keep in mind that in the dashboard area of this, there's the dashboard area, we will be able to change the theme. So we'll stick with that, and I'll show you exactly what that means. I'll give this a fill effect of we'll use this purple color, but that can be changed. So I'm going to use this darker color here, and then this middle color here. This will be our theme color that we're going to use. And then the second row, what we'll do is we'll just give it a little bit of that lighter color. So I'm going to right click, format those cells. Sorry, that's on right click. Fill effects on that. And then I'll just go ahead and give it that lighter purple, right? Just a bit lighter. That's good enough for our variant grayscale. And then what we're going to be doing is dropping down here, and I'll just give it the large range of just the baseline color, which is this color here. Now what I was meaning, in the dashboard, there's a dashboard part of this, and we can change the theme of this, right? So if I were to change that theme here, it would change throughout the workbook. And that was another training. This dashboard was another training. I'll include the links down below for that. So notice how it did change here. We'll keep it with that purple for now. All right, so continuing on with the customer balance. Now let's go ahead and format the title here. I will give it, let's say, I think I've got Cooper I was using before, and then Cooper standard black, that one, and then a font of 30, okay, and then I'll give it that color, use a bold here, and then the color, we'll use the same theme color down here, sticking with the theme, and that way if we change it, it's going to be optimized. And the same thing, customer, I'll do this a little bit lower font, right? So we'll choose probably Arial rounded for the subheading. So I'll scroll down here and just choose, I think I like the Arial round. Okay, so bold, that's to be sufficient, and I'll give it like something like 25. All right, also, and what I want, because I need to save for the button as well, and we'll go ahead and I'm bold with that, giving it that same color. And then I'm going to put that button right down here, but we will definitely be adding to that. Okay, so what I want for the next row is I want to do the report dates here. So I want to have report dates here, and then I want to have this year, this is going to be the date range. Now those date ranges we've built in already. Inside the admin screen of this particular application, we have some date range right on the right side here. So these are this month. So this is called date range. So that's the drop down list that I want to use. When I select on that, the from and to dates here are going to auto populate. So I'm going to use this date range. So I'm going to copy that using Control C. I'm going to go into the customer balances, and what I'm going to do is I want it starting right probably in column, let's say F here. That should be sufficient. So I'm going to use the merge and center these cells, because I need a larger, and then that's going to be basically a user drop down list. So I'm going to go into the data validation list here, and I'm going to add to that. So I'm going to choose this. I'm going to choose a list type, and I'm going to choose equals, and I want that date range there. So I pasted that in using Control V. So the next field I'm going to have, this is our from. So let's type in from, and then skip one and then go to 2. Okay, so this K is going to be used for our 2. I'm going to hold down the Control. I is going to be our from, and F and G are going to be our date range. So those I'm going to color in white. So that's going to be a white. Those are user entered fields. Then here I'm going to merge and center these. I need a little bit more space. So we're going to call this report, probably dates, report dates. So we know the date range is there. We could call it date range from and to. I like that. I'm going to right justify these, and then we're going to give it equal borders. So I'm going to hold down the Control and then highlight these, and I'm going to right click and format those. And we want very specific borders around there. So I'm going to use our same theme color. And that way, if we change the theme, it's going to work just fine. I'm going to surround it with the normal border, and then I'm going to use a dotted line in the middle. and click OK. All right, so now I've got that. Now I'm going to format these, holding down the controls. These are going to be a short date, right? So short date. So if I choose 1/1 and then let's say 12/31, I want that formatted properly. So we already have the date range here. So if I select this year, left justify that, I want, when I change this, I want those dates to populate here. Okay, I like that. That looks good. This is going to be our header, so I'm going to merge and center this one. This is going to be called, but now I want this customer, this header here for our report header, I want it a little bit customized, meaning I want it not to just say customer balance report, but I want it to say customer balance report from a specific date to a specific date and include that. Okay, so we're going to need to use this date. So I'm going to use this date and this date. I want to add some named ranges to that. So we're going to call this customer balance from. Customer balance from. Sorry, it was already here. I thought I cleared that out. Customer balance from. Okay, let's just say I typed that in, even though it's already there. This is going to be called customer balance to. Customer balance to. Pretend you didn't see that. All right. So I've given them named ranges. Okay, so that's going to help us not only in our formula here, but it's also going to help us in our report criteria when we have to run an advanced filter for original data. Okay, so I'm going to use this. So I want those inside that. So I'm going to call this equals. And then I'm going to type in caps, customer balance report, then a space, then quotations, and what do I want to show? Well, I want to show those dates, but those dates have to be formatted properly. So I'm going to use text to format that text function, text. Then what are we going to text? I'm going to text first the from date, so it's going to be called customer balance from date, then a comma, because that's the date. And what do I want to, the format, I'm just going to give it the mm/dd/YYYY. Okay, 4 Y's. Close the parentheses. And what else? I want a space and a space, so quotation, space, a dash, and we can use to or dash, that's fine. So we'll just use a dash and another space and the quotations, and then I want the to date. So I also want to format that. So it's going to be the customer balance to date, this one here, comma, and then we're going to use the same mm/dd/YYYY. Okay, so 4 Y's and the parentheses. Okay, let's take a look at that. I like that. It says customer balance report. Perfect. So what we're going to do is we're going to give that a bold. I'm going to give that a little bit, probably something around, let's see, 12, and we'll use Arial bold. Okay. So go up one, and then we'll just choose something like Arial round. We'll go with the same one that we went before, so we can keep consistency, which is the Arial rounded bold. I like that. Now I want to give it a very specific format, similar to what we have. So we're going to format those cells. And then what we're going to do is we're going to fill it. Let me bring down the percentage. We're a little bit high on the zoom percentage here. Fill effects. And then I'll give it a nice color like this, same, going also with the same theme color that we want here, and using that. So that's the one I want. Clicking OK. And we'll zoom out a little bit, 100%. Okay, that looks good. So we've got that. Now, what do I want to do? So let's make this bold here. So holding down the control and then B. And then I'll put some borders around here, but I want a subheading here too. So what do I want to do? I want to put the customer down here. So D and E are going to be the customer. So that's going to be our first. So let's just merge and center that, and we're going to call that customer. So now I want to leave an empty space here, and we want the total invoice. Column I is going to handle that. So I want the total invoiced. I want to know that. I want to know the total paid, TOT, and then paid, it's a smaller column. And I want to know what the customer balance is. That's going to appear in this column, so balance. Okay, that looks pretty good. So that's a subheading, so we're going to color that as such. Control B, format those cells. And then what I want to do is I want to give it that fill effects. So the fill effects is going to be just a little bit of a lighter color as the heading above. So we're going to use this lighter color just as we did above. I like that. That looks good. Clicking OK. All right, so now we have that. I also want to give it some borders around there. So I'm going to surround it all. Then what we're going to do is we're just going to give it that same border colors that we used above. Okay, so which is this one right here. It's that lower color, but we're going to do all the outline inside and outside here. And click OK. Okay, I like that, except for this one. We don't necessarily need that one. Just to separate the customer is sufficient. Now the customer is going to be E and F, so all we need to do is merge and center that, and then we can get rid of this border here. So we'll just clear that border out there. We don't need that right border. All right, so that looks good as a good header, saving our work as we always do. We will merge and center this here because it's going to go up and above. And then for this one, I'm going to merge and center that, but then I'm also going to, I need to save room for the button. So we're going to go back on the left, and then we'll just bring it back a little bit. So we also need a button up here. That's going to be our refresh button. So I'm going to insert a shape on that. illustration, shapes, and then we'll just use a square shape. And this is where I want this button to go. It's going to call refresh, okay? And that's all it's going to do, is just going to refresh that report, and that's sufficient enough. Now we'll give it a theme color here, something about our theme, which we'll do right here. Okay, so that I'm going to right justify that, so we have room for the icon. We can shrink it up a little bit. That's going to be sufficient. We can also move this over just a little bit here. We've got some extra space so it appears in the center. Okay, it's looking good. We've got our format and our header. That looks very good. I think we need to merge and center this one here. That customer is going to take over all the way from D through F. So let's go ahead and merge and center that twice. Okay, that looks very good. So we've got room for our customer. Now what we want to do is I'm going to use this column, right? This column starting in column row 6 in the column D. I want to put this first plus. So now what we're ready to do is we can add the icon. Let's go ahead and insert the icon here. In fact, I'm going to be inserting a few different icons. We can use one from here, or we can use the ones that I've saved. That works too. Refresh. We can use that here. Let's see, refresh. I think I saved one here. Okay, there we go. I'll use this one here. That's fine. And then we'll just give it a color white here. So we're going to give it that graphics fill of white. All right, I like that there. And then the size is right around 0.2. Okay, putting that over a button, what I'm going to do is align that up here, holding down the control, vertically align it, grouping it together, and then what we'll do is we'll assign it a macro, but we haven't created that macro just yet. Good, that looks really good. Again, saving our work. Now what we want to do is insert, I've got an icon for this. Probably need to stretch it out a little bit, and I want to put an icon here. So I'm going to insert. I've got another shape saved, a picture this time. And then this device has got to be in my folder that I've saved. Of course, if you want these icons and pictures and anything else that goes with the training, I'll make that available on our Patreon platform. Okay, so this icon is going to go up here, and then we'll save room for it. We'll bring it down and then give it a color that's closer to our theme. We will bring this over. I'll move this one over a little bit, giving us space, and giving it a color for our theme, which is going to be this purple here. So we'll use our purple theme here. And then all the refresh icon here, we've got the zoom in. This zoom in is going to be used a little bit later on, so we'll keep that here so that we can see it. We'll be using that for a button. In fact, I might as well just create it right now. I'm going to copy this. That's the inside button. And this is what I'm going to use for our zoom in. That's going to let us go to an invoice directly. I'm going to make this small enough, which is going to be right around the height of a particular row. So 0.2 is sufficient for us, and I'll make that zoom icon. So we're going to use that soon. I want to put this icon right on top, right? I want it to appear above it, so we're going to go into the picture format, and we're going to bring it to the front. Okay, zooming it all the way in, I want to make sure that it is smaller than the button, so we'll do about 0.16 for that, and I want to switch it just to a preference that I like, so I'm going to flip it horizontally. And then what I'm going to use my selection tool, selecting both of them, and I want them centered vertically and horizontally. Then I'm going to group them together, and I'm going to give it a very specific name. We'll call this View Invoice Button. That should be sufficient. View Invoice Button. Okay, and then usually what I like to do also, I don't want it to move or size, so we'll go into the Format picture, and I want to make sure that in the properties here, we want to add that, so it's here. Here, I want to make sure that we do not move or size with the cells. Okay, so that way it doesn't move this one as well. So, okay, good. That way the button won't change shape or size. Right? Then we'll keep this one away. We'll use this one a little bit later on. Zooming back out to 100%. Now we're ready to start writing some code. And basically what I want to do is I want to create data. I want to know all of the customers that have invoices between this date and this date. Now, where are we going to find that data? That data is going to be in our orders database. So we're going to use an advanced filter for that. We've got a list of orders. So I want to know every single order based on the order date from this, and I want to make sure it's only order types of invoices, right? Only focused on invoices, not purchase orders, work orders, or anything else. So we're going to set up an advanced filter to do that. So to do that, the best way to do it is to set up an advanced filter. Now I've set some criteria up already, and this will be for a specific customer name when we want to drill down the name, but we're not focused on names just yet. All I want to do is set up on basically a specific order date and an order type. So to do that, we need to set up a filter. Now the filter is going to be greater than, it's already been here, greater than or equal the customer balance from, right? Greater than or equal the customer balance from date. That's that date, that named range that we set up right here. It's this date right here. The next one's going to be less than or equal our customer balance to date. So we go in here, it's also going to be less than or equal, here it is right here, less than or equal our customer balance to date. We only want specific order types, right? We only want invoices. So right here from AA2 all the way to A3C, this is our criteria. We only want to return results from this. Now, which results do we want to return? I want to know the customer name. I want to have it here. I want to know the total invoiced. I want to know the total paid and a balance. And I also want to have a plus here in this column. I want to have a plus here. So I want the customer names to go in column E. I want a plus that's going to allow us to expand it. In column D, the total invoice and the total paid. Now, the total invoice and total paid aren't part of our original data, right? Inside our orders database, we don't have the total. We just have individual orders. So how are we going to get that total? How are we going to get the total paid? We're going to use a formula for that, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have our results turn all the customers that had invoices within that period. I want those results to appear right here. Once I know every customer that had an invoice order within those dates, the unique customers, then I want to know how much did Jackie invoice in that period. What was the total? 51,211, right? So how do we know that? Well, basically we're going to use a sum if formula, and I'm going to bring that sum if down here. So inside our data, we're going to bring it down here. So I'm going to use a sum if, right? Sum if. Now keep in mind that we have some named ranges that's going to help us inside this formula. Let's go over those named ranges right now. So we're going to be focused on our orders, right? We've got a lot of information here from a previous workbook, but we're just focused on orders right now. So if we take a look, we have order name, right? This is the name, the person that's ordered. This is a named range called order. It's only focused on the names of that order, right? It's a dynamic named range. We also have the order payment. How many payments, right? What is the total payments that they made there? We also have the order total, right? So we're focused on order total, order payments. So then also we want to know order type, right? Order type, it's only going to be for invoice type. So that's it. Okay, so now invoice type. In this particular training, we're only focused on those that are invoice. However, this invoice, keep that in mind that inside our admin screen, we allow the end users to call it whatever they want, right? So we've given it a named range. The user can change this to receipt or whatever they want to here. So this is called invoice orders, given a named range. So all I need to do is look for anything that said invoice order inside our formula. So inside our orders database, we're going to use the sum if for all that. So to determine the total invoice, we're going to, for a specific customer, like let's put it down here so it's a little bit easier, same formula, okay? So sum ifs, using sum ifs, multiple conditions, I want to sum the order total. It's going to be based on a very specific name, whatever's in AE3. It's going to also be based on a very specific order date. That order date must be greater than or equal to customer balance from. This is why we use named ranges, because it's much easier to read inside a formula. That order date also must be less than or equal to the customer balance to date, right? And the order type must also be an invoice order type, only the invoice order type. When all those conditions are met, that total should be summed up. And so when I take this formula here that's up here and bring it down here, I only want to bring it down for how many results. And that way when I run the report's going to clear all this data out. It's going to bring that brand new unique names list. It's going to pull this formula. It's going to bring it down here. Now the same formula is very similar, is I want to know the payments. So everything else is the same, the dates and everything else is the same. However, this time we're totaling payments. And now to determine the balance is simply the total invoice minus the total payment. So the balance is very simple. And then in it, we're just simply subtracting AG from AF. And so when we bring that formula down, we're going to determine all of the balance based on the payments and the total. And that's it. So all I need to do is just keep these three formulas here. This keeps your workbook very light because we don't need to permanently keep these formulas. In fact, after the macro runs, we could easily just clear that out. We only need the formulas here. We only need to bring the formulas down for only those rows in which we have results. That way, I call it formulas on demand or calculation on demand, so that we're only calculating those cells in where we really need it, and then we can remove it. Once we bring the totals over, we don't need the formulas here anymore. So inside our VBA, we're going to determine the last row. We're going to run an advanced filter based on this criteria right here. Then we're going to have those results here. Then we're going to bring down the formulas. Then I'm going to take all this information. I'm going to add a plus on the first column. I'm going to add a plus here in the first column. Then I'm going to add the customer here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add the invoice and the total paid and the balance here. So let's go ahead and write that up inside the code now, I've got a module here which we'll add in. And so we'll use that. So inside the developers, Visual Basic, and I've got a module here called Customer Balance Max. Customer Balance Max. That's the one in which we're going to write. It's a relatively easy macro as we just simply bring that data in. So the first thing what we want to do is we want to dimension the last row. We need to determine the last row of data as long. And I also want to know the last result row as long, getting those results, okay? And so we're ready to write the macro here. Sub, we'll call it customer balances and then refresh, okay? So that's simply going to refresh it, and that's the macro that's going to be tied to that button we created. So the first thing what we want to do inside our customer balance sheet, now we have this sheet here called customer balance. That's the one we're going to be focused on, customer balance. So the code name is called customer balance. So customer, which is what I'm going to use, customer balance, and then to make sure we have the sheet name, we'll put the dot, and we know we've got that IntelliSense popping up, meaning we have the code name correctly. Range, I want to clear all the information out. So what do I want to clear out? I want to clear out D6 all the way through K and then 99999. Okay, so dot clear the contents, clear contents. And how do we know that? Well, because our first row is 6 here, and all the way through K, from 6 all the way down. So basically we're just clearing out anything that might be there. So we're going to clear existing report data. Okay, next up what I want to do is there's going to be some shapes that I'm going to be adding in. Remember this, when I clear the shape, right? This particular shape here, view invoice button, right? I want to clear that out. I want to make sure that that button is not visible. So I'm going to copy the name of that if it is visible, and I'm going to hide it. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be customer balance dot shapes, and then pasting that in there, dot visible equals MSO false. So I want to make sure that that's hidden on refresh. And then there's another one that we're going to be adding in a little bit later on, which is that invoice preview, which is that invoice, but we're not there yet, but we'll be updating that as we know. Okay, the rest of it, we're going to be focused on that orders database. With orders database, that's the name of the sheet with all that orders, right? So remember I said what we need to do first is we need to clear out that data. I want to clear out all the results here. So AE3 through AH and all the way down, we're going to be clearing that out. So that's very important. So let's write that up right now. So dot range AE3 through AH and then all the way down, we could use the high row, dot clear content. Clear content. Okay, so now we've cleared it out. What I want to do is determine the last row. What is the last row? The last row of our data, okay? So that last row, I'm using AutoHotkey to determine that, is going to be last row range, last data row. Use AutoHotkey to automate that row, okay? So once we have the last row, I want to make sure that we actually have data. If it's less than 4, then we know that we don't have any data. We can exit the sub out. Okay, now we're ready to run our advanced filter. So our advanced filter is going to be this. We're going to use the data here. So what is that original data? That original data is going to start in A3, and we're going to go all the way through, let's just say A. We only need to go probably through the customer, but what we can do is just go through E. That's all we need to do, because we need the order type, right? That's important. We need the order date, and we need the name. So we can go A3 through E. That is our original data. So let's update that here, right here, A3 through E, and the last row. Where's our criteria? Let's drop this down and take a look at our criteria. We can bring this up for now. And that criteria is going to be right here. As mentioned, we want to include those dates, and we want to include the order type. So A2 through AC3 is where our criteria is. So A2, this is correct, through AC3 is where our criteria is. Where do we want those results to go? Well, I only want the names to go. So AE2 is sufficient, right? Everything else we can remove. AE2, that's all we need, okay? So that's going to bring all those unique customers here into this row. And I need to determine the last results row. To the last result row, it's equal to what? Dot range, and then we can use, let's say, probably our row, the only row that we need, which is AE. This is going to determine the last row of data. Now, if the last results row is less than 3, then we don't have any data. We can exit the sub, right? There's nothing else to continue. Okay, but assuming that we do have data, what I want to do is I want to bring down those formulas, right? And how far to bring them down? Bring them down from this. So we've already got our formulas. All I need to do is bring them down here. And we can do that with one line of code. So let's go ahead and write that line of code right now. And it's simply going to be dot range AF3 through AH and the last result row dot formula is equal to dot range AF1 through AH1 dot formula. Bring down customer balance formula, the results. All right, so bring down this formula is going to automatically calculate those. Once we have those, we are done. All I want to do is now just bring it into the sheet. So let's go ahead and end with this order sheet and put the rest of our focus back on the customer balance sheet. So let's do this with customer balance. Okay, make sure you add the dot just in case, just temporarily, to make sure you got the sheet name right. It's a good way. So the first thing what I want to do is I want to add in those pluses. That's going to be those expander icons that we're going to use, and we want to make sure to add them into our correct column. So that column is going to be column D. So D6 all the way down is where we're going to have. Now, if our first row of data starts on D6 and it comes from row 3, we need to compensate for that, okay? So to do that, we just, well, the pluses won't matter. So let's go ahead and add those pluses in as the first thing. So we can do that with this dot range D6 through how many? It's going to be D and the last result row plus 3, right? We need to compensate because our first row in our results is 3, and then we're going to bring it over to row 6. So notice the difference in the rows, 6, and our first row is going to be 3. Okay, so we have that. So the value is equal to what? Equals that plus, okay? So we're going to put in that plus right here. Now what do we have? Add expander icon. Okay. Okay, so once we have that, we can continue on with the rest of them. I want to put in those customer names. Where are those customer names going to go? In range E. So we can copy this down here. Actually, we can just write it down here. It's going to be, and then just change it to E. That's probably a little bit quicker. Pasting it down here. This is going to be column E. And where's the data going to come from? It's going to come directly from column AE, right? So we have to add in that sheet name again, which is the orders database dot range E3 through AE and the last results row. E and the last result row dot value, customer names. Okay, the next up is with the formulas, right? So we've got total, payments, and balance coming from AF through AH. Okay, so where are those going to go into? Those are going to go directly into columns I, J, and K. Okay, so let's go ahead and bring that in right now. So continuing with our code, last line of code for this, dot range I6 through K and the last result row plus 3 again. Dot value is equal to the orders database dot range, and then this one's going to be AF3 through A through H and the last result row dot value. Then that's going to be the total, payments, and the balance, Okay, so we've got all that over. Okay, let's save our work. Okay, now this is we're going to be adding, this is what I want to do. I want to make sure that we're going to copy this and add that to our button so that when we click that button, that automatically refreshes. So we're going to assign that macro to that, pasting that in here. We'll go do this workbook and then click OK. Okay, saving our work once again. Always good to save your work, right? Just before you run a macro is a good idea. Refreshing that, and if there's any issues, will come up. Okay, so we've got a lot of data. That looks pretty good. I like that. Let's just continue with our formats all the way down. I want to make sure that they extend well beyond where we need them. Okay, that looks good. And now all we need to do is just refresh that once again. It's going to clear all that data. All right, so what we want to do is, obviously these are going to be a currency, so we need to format these accordingly. So bringing that down a lot of rows. These I want formatted as a currency, so I'm going to go into the home, and then what we're going to be doing is general here, and then we could just click currency here. I like that. That looks good, saving our work. So everything looks good. I probably would like to right justify these, right? So all the way down here, and bringing them over on the right side so that they're close to the names. I like that. So the idea is when you click a plus, it expands. And then the last thing, we will add conditional formatting to make it look good. That'll be last. We'll do all that at the same time. Okay, so we have customer, We have total invoice, total paid, and balance. Okay, let's center these here. It's looking pretty good. Okay, so now what we're doing is we're ready automatically to add in. When I click here, now we want to add in the invoices for that particular customer. Well, that's going to be on selection change. When I make a selection change, that's what I want something to happen. So how do we do that? So that selection change event is going to happen directly on the sheet. So when we go into customer balance, we don't have anything here. This is the sheet. This is the on-code sheet. We're going to select the worksheet. Now we're going to select selection change. It's already been selected. So if the user makes a selection change, then we want something to happen. When do we want it to happen? When they make a selection change from D6 all the way on down, but we need to make sure that there's actually a value here. So we need to check. If it's empty, we don't want anything to happen. So we're going to do, if not, right, intersection, D6 all the way down to, let's just say a large number, D9999, nothing, and range. I use D and the target row. It's better than target value because that creates issues. Sometimes D and the target dot row dot value does not equal empty. Then we want something to happen, right? Then what do we want to happen? Well, basically what I want to do is I want to check to see if it's a plus, I want to expand it. If it's a minus, I want to shrink it, right? So that's the basic premise. But I also want to make sure if the user selects more than one cell, I don't want anything to happen. So if the target dot count large is greater than 1, then exit the sub, exit sub. Good, so what do we want to happen? Well, the first thing what we want to do is I want to make sure that we are determining what it is, what it's not, right? So I want to turn off, I don't want this thing to repeat again and again. So the first thing I'm going to do is turn off application screen updating. So I don't want, or enable events actually, application dot enable events. I'm going to turn that off, equals false, right? That means I only want this thing to run once completely until it's over. I don't want it to loop through, so this is important. But make sure that if you do that, turn it back on, application. And it's a little bit frustrating sometimes if you get a bug in the middle of this, let's say, which we probably will, nothing's going to happen, right? Because it didn't run this. So what I just like to do is just add a little sub test, or you could just say turned on, right? Events, just temporarily, and then just use this. That way, if we ever have a bug in the middle, then we've turned off events, but we don't have a way of turning it on. I just use this to turn it on. I just run this macro and it turns it on, which we'll probably use. If we have a bug, usually I do, that means it's going to be turned off. Somewhere in the middle is going to be a bug, and then this doesn't have a chance to run. So we just run this and it does it, triggers it again. Great, so we've got that because that's kind of important. We don't want to loop it out, but make sure you always, before the end macro, and make sure you don't exit the sub out before turning this on, right? We can't use exit sub, where you can use a go to. This must run. So inside here, what do we want to do? Well, the first thing, there's a few things we want to do, whether it's a plus or a minus, and that's gonna, I want to know the last row, and we want to know what the selected row is. So let's dimension a few variables, and we'll dimension them up here so we can use them wherever we want. Dimension the last row as long, and I also want to know the last result row as long. Also the last balance row. What is the last row on that balance sheet? It's going to be also a long variable as well. I also want to know the selected row. What row has the user selected? It's going to be a long variable. And I also want to know the total row. So total rows as long. I also want to know, when we're going through the customers, dimension the next customer. This is going to be helpful. Row as long, and also the next invoice row. We're going to keep track of those so we know which is the next invoice, which is the next customer. Next invoice row as long, and also the last item row. Items and invoices and customers are very important, so we can keep track of it. Last item row as long. Okay, I also want to know the customer string and the invoice number as string. That will help us. Dimension customer name as string, and also the invoice number, because I'm going to need to go to that invoice, so we're going to put that in a variable as string. Okay, so that's all the variables we're going to be using here. So once we've turned off application, what I want to do is I want to determine what is the last balance row, right? What is the last row? It's going to be usually based on this right here, unless it's been expanded. So we're going to start out with this. The last row is going to be based on our column D, or we can use the customer in column E. Either one would work for us. So let's go ahead and write that in. We will use this as D to start out. So continuing on here, inside our module here, so we're going to say the last balance row is equal to, when we use column D. D will give us that. Now what I want, we'll put this as a comment, last balance. And I also want to know the selected row. So the selected row is going to be equal to the target row. Okay, that's the selected row. Once we have that, we can use that instead of the target row. We can use that in our code. Continuing on, what else do we need to know? At this point, I want to determine what the user has selected. What is in the selected cell? Is it a plus? Do we expand it? Or is it a minus? So if the target dot value equals the plus, then we know to expand it. Then expand it. Else shrink it. Else we can call this shrink, or we can call this collapse. And then we can use this. So this is going to be expand. So we know that it will expand. So let's put the comment expand here, and we can write our code and expand. Always good to comment out so we know where we are. Continuing on. So now that we know we're going to expand it, what do I want to happen? Well, the first thing what I want to do is I want to change that plus to a minus. So the target dot value is going to equal the minus symbol, right? So set, just called set or collapse. Let's stick with the collapse icon. So once we've set that, what I want to do is I want to determine the customer name. The customer name is going to be equal to whatever's in range and E, right? And the selected row. That's going to be our customer name, selected row. Dot value. It's the customer name. And that's important because I'm going to need to run that customer name. Why is that important? Because I need to place that. Oops, we don't need a dot before that. That's fine. We need to place that directly inside that. And let's just make sure we turn on screen updating. I want to place that directly inside here because I want to know all of the invoices for a specific customer when we expand it. And I want to put those results right here. So because I want to know the order date. I want to skip a column, and I want to know the payments if there's any been made and a balance, right? So I need to take that name and put it directly inside Z3. Then we're going to run a new drill advanced filter with this criteria from Z2 through AC3. So that customer name is very important. So continuing on, now that we've written a little bit of our code, we can see that we've got that customer name inside a variable. So what do we want to do now? I want to run that advanced filter. Run advanced filter. So again, we want to know the last row. What is the last row? So here, but the first thing what I want to do is set that customer name. Remember, we just put it in here. I'll put it directly inside Z3. It's going to take on our customer name. So let's do that right now. Orders database.range Z3.value is equal to the customer name. That's going to set customer name criteria. The rest of the criteria has already been set, so we don't need to worry about that. Determine the last row. What is that last row? That last row is basically based on that data, that orders database. So we need to put in the orders database. Okay, that's what we're going to want to know, the last row. If that last row is less than 4, that means we have no data. If that last row, then we're not going to exit the sub. We're going to go to, let's just call it no data. Go to no data. So no data is going to skip right down here, no data. That's important, right? Not exiting the sub. We can't exit the sub because we must enable events first before we can leave. Continuing on, so assuming that we have data, we can move on and run that advanced filter. And that advanced filter is going to be based on that orders database. So we need to put in that sheet name here, orders database. So we've got that. Now, where's it going to come from? Now let's take a look at where we want. So here's what I want to do. I want to put inside here, I want to put the invoice number. Where do I want to put that invoice number? Let's add in this sheet name so we don't get an error. We need to put in them for here. And then I want to put in here. Let's take a look here. Okay, right here. Okay, so that's important. So now what I want to do is I want to put in, I want to put the plus mark in here, right? Let's just clear that data out so we can see what we're doing here. So we can see let's just clear that out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the plus or minus here. I'm going to put the invoice number here. So I want something like invoice number here. Then I want to put the date here, the date of that invoice. I want to skip a column. And I want to put the invoice, let's just do invoice amount here. Then what do I want to do? Then I want to put the paid, and then I want to do the balance here. So that's what I want to have. First, I want headers. So remember, we're skipping a column here. So these are the headers that I'm going to want to put in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this, and then we just need to paste the values. I'm going to bring it over here. Let's just say way over here off the screen. And I'm going to paste those values in right here, pasting those values. We're going to call this the invoice header, right? I want specific, or the customer header, right? Because these are specifically for the customer, right? So what I want to do is I want to add that in at the top. So I'm going to give this a name. We're going to call this customer head. So that's going to head all the customers. So this name, so that way we can copy this and bring it in wherever we need it. And I'm going to bring it right in here. or wherever it is. Okay, and then the plus or the minus is going to go here. So it would probably look something like this. Then what we do is we'd have a minus here. That's exactly what I want to happen. Okay, so great. So we've got that there. Notice when I selected it, it changed automatically. Perfect. So it's working just the way I want it. So then we're going to have the invoices list here. But here, this is something to keep in mind. We're skipping this column, right? There's nothing in this column. Invoice, date, we're skipping a column, then invoice amount and paid. So I want the results to have exactly that. So when I go in and I want those results of that advanced filter, I want the order ID, right? The order date, actually the order ID, invoice number, same thing. Here we call it order ID. The reason we call it order ID here is because that's the name of the file. I can call it whatever I want inside our customer balance. I'm calling it invoice number, but it's the same thing, okay? So we want to make sure it matches, right? Order, it must always match the original. If the original data is called order ID in the results, we must also call it order ID. So that's very important. Whoops, wrong database. So the order ID here, the order date, we're skipping a column, the total, the payments, and the balance, okay? All right, so we have that, but the reason, if we're going to skip a column in the results, I need to make sure that that original data also includes a blank column. To do that, that original data must, when we run our advanced filter, it must go to column O, right? It must include a blank. So when we run that advanced filter, which is where we are right now, we're going to start out in A3. We're going to go all the way to column O. Very important. Now, where's our criteria? If we take a look inside our criteria here, our criteria now includes the name. So it's going to be Z2 through AC3. Z2 through AC3 is where we want. So Z2 here, all the way through AC and then 3. And where do we want those results to come? Those results are going to come all the way over here inside from AJ2 all the way through AO2. So that's where our results are going to come here. AJ2 through AO2. Okay, good. So now that we have the results in there, we need to determine the last results row. What is the last results row? It's going to be basically based on, oops, we skipped one. We need one more. What is the last, making sure that it is less. The last results row is going to be equal to basically whatever's we're going to use column AJ. So AJ, if it's less than 3, we're not going to exit the sub out. We're going to go to no customer or no data. So we'll just do no data. Okay, go to no data, go to no data. I like that. That looks good. Now, assuming that we do, we want to bring that information over. But I'd like to put the total number of rows. What are the total number of rows? Basically, it's the last row, 14, minus 2, right? So that's going to give us 12. So let's put that into a variable. We do have it. We do have the variable up here called total rows, TOT rows. That's what I'm going to add in now. So total rows is simply equal to the last result row minus 2. So I want to know the total number of data. Total rows of results. It's called results. All right, so now that we know the total rows, I want to determine if we're on the last row or not, right? It's important. If, for example, if we're expanding on the last row, I know that we don't need to insert anything below, right? I'm going to need to copy that last row. It should be orders database, right? Based on orders database, important, okay? And then continuing on with our code. Okay, so we need to know, let's see, variable total rows. I think that should be rows, okay? Good, so what I want to do is, if it's not the last row, I need to copy this basically and bring it down here, however many rows, and then insert the rows of our data in here, clear it out, and then insert the rows, right? But if we're on the last row, I don't need to do that. So I need to determine, is the selected row also the last row? So if we can do that, we can skip the copy. So let's do that right now. Let's write in that code. So if the last balance row is equal to the selected row, then go to, let's call skip copy down, right? We don't need to copy the existing data down, okay? So we can skip copy down. So assuming that we do have, it's not in the middle row, let's just say it's somewhere in the middle here, I need to take whatever's below it and copy it below however many rows that we need to based on the total rows. So if we're going to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to go here. So range D, using that column, and the selected row, but I don't want the selected row, I want to know the row below, plus 1, right? We're starting on the row below, plus 1, all the way through K, and the last balance row, we're going to copy that, K, and the last balance row dot copy. All right, I'm going to copy all that data. I'm going to bring it down. Copy existing data below selected row. Great. So once we have that, let's take a look at that. Okay, before we'll go ahead and add a few more lines of code. So what I want to do is I want to bring down that copied data row, but how many rows? Based on the total rows. So it looks something like this. Range here, D, and the selected row plus 1. I'm going to clear out those contents first, right? Now that we've copied them, I'm going to paste those actually, plus the total rows, right? We need to bring down that data, total rows, plus 2, we're adding 2, plus 2, dot paste special, dot paste values, right? We're pasting the values. XL paste values. That's what I want, values. Okay, so just bring the base. Okay, so let's see where we are now. Let's continue on, saving our work. We'll refresh the report and see how we're doing on, okay. So let's take a look on Betty White. Okay, so what I want to do is basically, I want to copy, take the lower row here, all the data here. I want to determine how many rows, how many results. Let's take a look in our order days. We see that Betty has 3. Okay, Betty has 3 invoices. So I need to know that I need to clear out 4 rows. Why 4 rows? 1 for the total, right, below Betty, and 3 for the data. 3 for the data. So 1, 2, 3. So that means Nancy Smith, the next one must be down here. The next stop is to simply clear out these data, clear out the rows. So that's the next line of code, is to clear out the next 4 rows. Total rows plus 1, that's how many we need to clear out so we can put that data. We have the header row plus 3 invoices. Okay, so that's the next line of code. So how do we do that? Well, we're just gonna use the clear content. So range D and the selected row plus 1, right? Starting with the row below, all the way through, and K, and how many rows? And the selected row plus total rows plus 1 dot clear content. Okay, let's see how that works. Clear rows below. Okay, so let's start again and see where we are. So we're refreshing. We know that Betty White has 3 invoices. So I'm going to click here and I want 4 rows. Remember, 3 rows of data plus the header. Okay, good. So we've cleared out, and everything from Nancy Smith all the way to James gets copied down. So let's see that again, right? Everything from Nancy Smith all the way to James gets brought down 3 rows as soon as I click here. Perfect. So that's exactly what I want. See, it's all down here. So now what we want to do is we want to then take this invoice header and I want to bring it directly inside here. Right in here, starting in right here. Okay, so let's do that right now. Probably right here, and we'll put the minus here. So let's do that in a few lines of code. All right, so continuing on, now that we have that there, we're going to ready to bring it over down. So, but now what we're going to be doing is, since we've cleared the rows below, skip copy down. So this, we can go down here, meaning this only happens, right, if it's not the last row. If it's not the last row. Everything else happens once we're down here. Okay, so continuing on, range, right? I want to add in that customer header, right? Range F, where's it going to be adding in? And the selected row plus 1, right? The row below plus 1 all the way through K and the selected row plus 1, right? And all the way through K and the selected row plus 1 dot value is equal to range customer head dot value. All right, let's take a look at that and see if everything's okay. Refreshing that once again. Okay, clicking on Betty White. Okay, so now we have that customer header in right here. Okay, I like that. Now we're ready to add those 3 rows of data, and that's going to come directly from here. So we're adding in these 3 rows, and I'm going to bring it directly inside here, starting in column F all the way through column K. So that's the next line of code. Okay, so adding a line here. So range F and the selected row, this time plus 2, right? We've already added the header row, so this time it's plus 2 all the way through K and the selected row plus the total rows plus 1 dot value equals what? Where is it coming from? Orders database dot range. Let's take a look at exactly where it's coming from. We know that it's coming from, oh, that's okay. We're not finished with that line of code yet. No worries on that. So it's going to come directly from AJ3 all the way through AO in the last results row. So range AJ3 through AO and the last results row. Last result row dot value. Okay. Bring over invoice data. Okay, let's take a look at that and see where we are at. And let's fix that orders database. All right, here we go. And we need an and sign there. All right, so I like that. There we go. That looks good. Okay, let's continue on. Saving our work. Let's see how we're doing now. Make sure that that data got brought over. Remember, we'll do the conditional formatting at last. Refreshing the data starting out at, okay, let's execute that. Let's go ahead and reset that. And then refreshing that. Now, let's take a look at that. Okay, so that looks good. I like Betty White's, right? All that information in here. And then we'll do is refresh it and use just the Betty White one sample, which is 3 invoices. Okay, so we've got invoice data. We've got 3 invoices. That looks pretty good. I like that. That looks great. All right, so now all we need to do is, since we're going to be expanding those individual invoices, I need to put a plus symbol right here in column E, right? So that plus symbol, that means we're going to basically be able to expand those. So let's go ahead and add that in here. But I don't really want to add in, I don't want to put it just a plus in here, right? I want that plus to appear all the way on the right side, but I don't want to right justify it, because if I right justify it, then these are going to be right, the names are going to be right justified. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in about 12 different spaces. I think about 12 I've calculated, and that looks good. So I'll put in about 12 different spaces and then the plus, right? So that's what I want to put in. So something like about there, because I want the plus to appear here, but I don't want to right justify because I want to keep this. So basically I'm going to add in the plus, 12 spaces, and then the plus. Okay, I like that. So let's go ahead and add that in right now. So the next line of code, let's give some space here. We're going to put that, of course, it's going to be in column E. So range E and the selected row plus 2. That's where we're starting out. And of course, it's going to go all the way to E, in this case, just column E. E and the selected row plus the total rows, right? Selected row plus total rows plus 1. And the selected row plus total rows plus 1, again, plus 1. Dot value equals that plus equals, and then we'll just put that in quotes. I've already copied and pasted it. Perfect. Okay, so I like that. Let's save it again, as we always do. Refresh it and try it once more. Step by step, it kind of helps you see the way we're doing it. And you can see that, okay, so now we've got the pluses in here. They're formatted right, just on the right side. We've got the invoice numbers. We can probably center these or left justify these, because it's just the invoice numbers that are going to go in here. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to left justify that. That's going to put it left, or center would be okay for that. The dates, of course, those should probably be, and I'm going to just put those in the center there. I think that's going to be sufficient. Centering that column, that will look nice. Okay, that looks good. We've got the invoice number, the dates. Remember, we're going to format these. That'll be the last thing, using conditional format. Okay, so we've expanded it properly and everything looks really good. Now what I want to do is when I click on here, it collapses, right? I want all this to go away and I want to bring everything else back up. So that's going to be under the else. So let's continue with that code. And that's going to be right here. This is collapse. So we've done everything we can already on the expander, so now we're ready to collapse it. Okay, so let's clear out that extra line, and we're going to focus on the collapse. And the first thing what we want to do is add in that plus. So the target dot value equals the plus. Okay, so we're adding that plus here, and that's going to set the expander icon. So once we have that, I want to determine the next customer row, right? If I'm going to be basically expand, I need to clear out some rows here. How many rows do I need to determine? Well, I need to look for this. I need to find out where the next icon is. So that's going to tell me where the next one. I'm going to look for the next row. So how do we get that? We're going to put that into a variable. We're going to call it the next customer row is equal to not range. We're starting out in column D. I want to know where D and the selected row, and all the way through D. Let's just call it D, and then a larger 999. What am I going to look for? I'm going to look for the find. I'm going to find anything, basically. So we're going to use the wildcard for that. And I want to find in XL values and then XL whole. Great. And what do I want? I want the row number. So I'm going to extract that row number. So that row number is going to get us our next customer row. So I know that the row is on. So in this case, the next row would be 12, right? If we're selected this, our next row is going to be 12. So if I know, that means I've got 4 rows to collapse, right? So I'm going to clear these rows out, and whatever else is below that, I'm going to bring it all the way up. Okay, so that's exactly what we're going to do. So I do want to check to know if it's the last row. But what if it's the last row, right? If I've expanded the last row here, I know that there's nothing else to bring. I don't need to bring anything else up. So we can skip bringing anything else up. All I need to do is just clear out the last rows. So if it's the last row, that's all I have to do. So we're going to need to determine that. Is it the last row? So if the next customer row is equal to the selected row plus one, and in this case, it's going to be the second one available. Then go to no invoice. Then go to, let's do no invoice, okay? That means there's no invoices, right? What if there's no invoices, right? What if we have a customer that's got no invoices? We need to know that. Then go to no invoice, okay? Then go to if, so we'll do down here, no invoice, okay? All right, so we have that there. Now we're ready to move on. That's just one caveat, so I'm going to put a comment here. No invoice. That means we've got a customer but no invoices. Okay, but here's where I want to check for the last row. If the next customer row equals the last balance row, then what do we want to do? Then I want to update that. I want to determine the total rows. In other words, how do I know if I know that we've got 4 rows because I've got data here, but what about if it's this, right? How do I know how many total rows? Well, I'm going to use another column to determine that. And how do I use that? I'm going to use column F. Column F is going to tell me the last row to determine the total rows. So I can use that minus the selected row. So if I know the last row is 45 here, and I know our selected row is 41 here, so all I need to do is determine 45 minus 41. That's going to get us our total rows. However, in this case, right, if our next row is 12 and I determine our selected row is 7, all I need to do is subtract 12 from 7. So there's a difference between the last row and the first row. So if the next customer row equals the last balance row, last row, and if, and then else, we'll write an else in here, else. Okay, so as mentioned before, we need to determine what is the total rows. So total rows is equal to range, in this case, F, 999. We're using F. Why are we using F? Because there's no data in column E. Dot end, XLF, dot row. I want to know that row. And if I know that that row is the last one, I could subtract that from the selected row, minus the selected row. Minus the selected row. Okay, that's going to be total rows if last selected row. Okay. Otherwise, total rows is equal to the next customer row minus selected row minus 1. Minus selected row minus 1. Okay, total rows if middle selected row. Okay. All right, so we're just determining the total rows based on either one of those. I think those are total rows. Okay, so we've got the variable correct, right? We're saving our work. We just need to determine the total rows. That's very important because I need to know how many rows to clear out. Okay, now we know how many rows to clear out, so let's move on. Okay, so continuing on, we just need to run that macro. I want to make sure that we have amount of totals. If the total rows equals 0, just in case, then go to, let's just do no invoice, okay? No invoice. That means you can have a customer and maybe there's no invoices for that customer during that time, although that should never happen because we're basing it on advanced filter that has invoices. Okay, so just in case, now we're going to continue on. So now we're ready to clear the content. So range E and the selected row plus 1 through, let's see, and through K and the total selected row plus the total rows dot clear content. Clear existing invoices. I like that. Clear meaning open copy items. Okay, we're good with that. So that's going to clear them out. So once we've cleared them out, then what we want to do is shift everything else up, but only if there is data, right? We don't want to shift. We only want to shift if it's not the last row. Okay, but let's just run the code. Let's save our work and run the code to see how we're doing so far. Okay, let's take a look at variable not done, total rows. Okay, not there. And total rows. Okay, all right. So continuing on. So now what I want to do is I want to hit that and click that. And let's go ahead and make sure that we are running this enable events. Run that just in case. Then clicking here. Okay, so that's exactly what I cleared those rows. So now the next job of us is to take the remaining data and shift it all the way up. So bring it all the way up by the terminal and then clear whatever data that we have remaining. So we're going to copy that data up. So that's what we need to do next. And that's assuming that it's not the last row. Obviously, if it's the last row, we're not going to do that. So let's just first check to see if the last row, if the next customer row does not equal the last balance row, then only then are we going to shift everything up. So how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to use range D and the selected row, right? Plus the total rows, plus the total rows, plus 1, and then we'll go all the way through K, and the last results row, let's use the and the last balance row, we're going to copy that balance row dot copy, right? We're going to copy everything. I need to shift it up. So the first thing we want to do is copy it up. Where do we want to paste it? We want to paste it in the row below the selected row. So range D and the selected row plus 1, that's where we're going to paste it. Dot paste special, right? We're pasting those values, right? Excel paste values. So we're pasting those values in, okay? So now that we've brought it all the way up and pasted everything up, now what I want to do, so basically all we did, let's just say in this case, bringing it all up here, I'm going to copy this here. I'm going to paste it directly here. So paste the values. Okay, so now we've pasted. So now what I need to do is I need to clear out those remaining values, that duplicated value down here. So this line of code will take care of just that. All right, so continuing on. So here we have range D and the last balance row minus the total rows, right? Because we need to know total rows plus 1 and all the way through, and then K here, and then we'll just do 999, some large number, 9999 dot clear. That looks at clear remaining copied items. Okay, I like that. Ending if, make sure we close that out, and we can remove the additional spaces here and here. Okay, so let's take a look and see how that works. Saving our work, and then let's continue. Let's start new again, refresh that, refreshing that. Okay, we're going to expand Betty White here. It expands the rows, and then I'm going to select here, and it's going to collapse it, and then make sure that we have perfect. Okay, that looks really nice. Let's do that one more time. Let's do it for a large one with a lot of invoices. It's going to bring it all the way out here, right? And then we're going to collapse it here. That looks really, really good. That's exactly the way I want to. The only thing I want to do is I just want to select another cell. Let's select F3 at the end of this, just so that it's not selected. So the last thing what we'll do is range F3.select. Okay, that's just going to make sure that all that data is not selected because I don't really want that. Okay, let's take a look here. Doing it down here and then coming back up here, and now F3. So now you see the data is not selected and it looks really nice. All right, very, very good. So we've covered that. So now we know. So now what I want to do is I want to be able to select on here, and I want all the invoice items associated with this to expand based on the number of items in there. Okay, so that's going to be on the selection change of E, column E, and making sure that it's a plus or a minus, right? If we select here or here, we don't want anything to happen, but only if it's a plus or a minus, okay? So that's another selection change event. So let's write the selection change event. And basically what I want to do is when a user selects on either a plus or a minus here, especially a plus, I want to determine what the invoice number is. And I want to run an advanced filter. I want to know all the items that are associated with this invoice number. What do I mean by that? Well, inside the orders, if we've typed in order number 22, right, I want to know all the items that are associated with that invoice, and I want to list them there. Those items are stored in something called the order items database. So I want to run an advanced filter, and I want to base it on certain criteria. Right. And that criteria is going to be that order ID. So VBA is going to take that order ID, it's going to put it in directly inside AA3. Then I want the results. And where do I want the results to come? I want the results to come directly in here. I want the item, the quantity, the amount, and the total. Right. And where do I want those to go? Once I add those, I'm going to add those inside the customer balance. Right. So let's say right about here, let's just clear that out just for the fun of it. Right. Let's say we have order 10. So I want to put inside here, I want to know that information. So we're going to put, I want to know the item here. I'm going to put the item. I also want to skip a column, and I want to put the quantity here. What is the quantity? I want to know the amount, and I want to know the total. I want to have that all information here. So I want to have this as a header, right? So that's important. So what we're going to call this invoice header, I'm going to copy this. I'm going to bring it over here because we need to bring in that header. I'm going to paste it right down here. Paste those values. That's sufficient. And I'm going to give this a named range. I'm going to call it invoice head. That's the head of our invoice. So we have now customer. So now all I have to do is take this range and bring it directly inside here. Then all I need to do is list the items accordingly down here. But I need to do it, take that invoice number and bring in it. Now, since we're skipping a column on our results, right? There's no data in here. That means we also need to make sure in our order items database that we're skipping a column here. And that means in our advanced filter, we must also include a blank column in our original data from M. So that's very important. So we're going to bring it up. So again, we're going to determine the last row of our order items database. We're going to use criteria AA2. We're going to make sure that we first put in whatever order number it is, and we know that order number, also known as invoice ID, because it's going to be on the column of the selected, right? If I select this, I know the column to the right, that's where the invoice ID, which is the same thing as the order ID, we're going to place that directly inside AA3. We're going to run that advanced filter with that empty column, determine the results, determine the total number of results, and then bring those results in right after we bring in the header. So that's how we're going to do it. So it's very similar to what we've done before. So it'll be a little bit more of a repetition, but that's going to help you learn. And of course, that's going to be on our customer balance, right? So that's going to be, it's also part of our worksheet selection change event, right? So this one is going to be on invoice selection. We're going to expand or reduce those invoices. So the first thing what we want to do is we want to make sure that the user has made a selection. So if not intersection, what are we focused on? We're focused on column E. So we're going to start it out in E6 all the way down, E and then 9999, right? Is nothing, right? And we want to make sure that there is a value in E, right? And range E, let's move that here, E, and the target dot row dot value does not equal empty, and if then. So we have that, but I also want to make sure that they haven't selected something else, right? If they've selected this, I want something to happen, but nothing here, only if it's a plus or minus. So only if it's this plus or only if it's a minus do we want something to happen. If not, then we can exit the sub out, right? There's nothing to do if they have not selected a plus or minus. So if range E and the target dot row dot value does not equal, and then this plus, right? I've just copied it, and range E and the target dot row dot value does not equal, then this will go with the minus, right? That would be the minus, right? If it's not either one of those, then exit the sub. If it is, then we can move on. The first thing I want to do is do application.enable events equals false. And of course, we always want to make sure that we're going to make it true again. So before we get out of that, so application, just like we did before, .enable events equals true. Okay, make sure we set it to true before we exit. We can't exit out of the sub until we make it true. Okay, so now what we want to do is I also want to know, just like we did before, I want to know the selected and the last balance row. So I want to know these two things right here. These are important, right? So the last balance, so we can just copy those, right? And just paste them down here. I want to know the same information, the last balance row based on column D, and I want to know the selected. In fact, we can use column E in this case. And why are we using column E? Because this case, like if we've expanded this, right, I want to know based on column E, right? So E is more important here. So we want to know because D is not going to be helpful. So E is going to contain that plus. So E will help us out. Okay, so column E, let's refresh that. Let's change that. So the last one's going to be based on column E. Now we could probably do it right here too. I would change that to E just in case we've expanded the last column. I think that's good. Okay. So column E it is, that's going to help us. Now continuing on, the selected row is always going to be the target row. Certainly that's important. Now what we want to do is I want to know if the last balance row is less than the selected row. That's very important. So if the last balance row is less than the selected row, then the last balance row, I want to make sure, why is that important? Because if they've selected something down here, they selected here. I knew that was going to, haven't finished my thought yet on that. Let's comment that out so I can explain it to you. So we're going to reset that and let's just run this again to make sure we enabled events, right? So if that last balance row, and this is E, I want to make sure that we haven't expanded those, right? Because if we've expanded these two, our last balance row is going to be based on column F. So I want to make sure that we've expanded all, considering all of the last balance row. So we'll use this one, right? Because if I've got items, if I've expanded this too, we've got items here, right? So the last will be based on column G or based on column F. So either one's going to help, right? Because we're going to have those. So let's go ahead and continue that thought, right? And then what we'll do is we'll make that consideration, just making sure that we've covered all the last balance rows in case the last row has been expanded. Then the last balance row is simply equal to the range E9999.end XLUp.row. So the last balance row, just making sure that we have covered for every scenario possible. So now what I want to determine is are we focused on a plus or a negative, right? Are we expanding or decreasing that? Okay. So what I'm going to do is just determine here, if, just going to copy this here. So now we know if it's a plus, then we are going to expand, then expand, else, and if. So, and then this would be collapse. All right, so we know we're going to be expanding those invoices if it's a plus. So then what we're going to be doing is we first want to set it back to the minus, right? We always want to set it to the minus. So I'm just going to copy this here, and then we're going to say here, range E and the target row, target dot row dot value is equal to, right? Minus, right? If it's a plus, we're going to make it minus. If it's a minus, we're going to make it plus. Set collapse icon. Likewise, if it's a minus, we're going to set it to plus. So we can just do this down here. So we can do this. If it's collapsing, we're going to add the plus in. So pasting that and then just making that a plus. So we basically just need to reverse it either way, which one it is. Okay, continuing on. Now that we set the reverse, we want to then set the order items invoice number. Remember, we have to do that invoice number. So order items database dot range AA3 dot value equals what? Equals that. Where's that invoice ID? Range. Actually, we could put in a variable. Range. Where's it located? It's located in F in the selected row. I know we're not finished. That's fine. It's going to be located in F and the selected row. So let's add that in here. So range F and the selected row dot value. So that's going to be our set the invoice number for our advanced filter. So now that we have that, and then what I want to do is I want to then determine the last row. Now we're ready to run our advanced filter on our order items. Determining the last row of this, so we can run our advanced filter, and then setting up our advanced filter based all the way to column M. Column M, very important. Okay, so we're going to run that advanced filter after we get the last row is equal to range, and that's going to be our order items database. So make sure we put that database in, right? That's not going to be sufficient. Setting that particular sheet using the code name. Okay, so once we have that, right, if it's less than 4, we can go to no data, so we can write that. If the last row is this, not exit sub, we'll just call it to go to no, let's go no invoice data. So that's probably good. And then we're going to skip everything right here. And then we're going to place that directly down here, right? Making sure it is above the enable events. Okay. Oh, that should be a colon there. All right. Good. I like that. Now, assuming that there is data, we're ready to run our advanced filter. Now, our advanced filter is going to be based on the order items, which is 3, but we're going to go all the way to column M. And where's our criteria? We've already set that invoice number. We've already set it in AA3. So our criteria is AA2 through AA3 of that particular sheet, making sure that we set it based on this sheet. So I'm going to copy the sheet. It's going to be based directly on this sheet. So in each of the conditions, the criteria and the result, we must always set that sheet. So I'm doing that right now, setting that sheet up. So now that we have our criteria is going to be AA2 through AA3. Let's adjust that, making sure our column goes to M, which is what we want it to, AA3 through M. And those results are going to come directly from AC2 through AG, AC2 through AG. Okay, the last results row are going to be based on column AC. So the last results row are going to be based on column AC. Making sure that we have results. If we don't, we're going to skip to no data. So if last results are less than 3, we're going to go to no invoice data. All right, so now that we have data, I want to bring that data over, but first I want to determine the total number of rows. The total number of rows are basically the last results row. Total rows, just as we did before, is equal to the last result row minus 2. It's going to set the total number of rows, total invoice item rows. So now that we know how many, in this case it was 2, right? So now that we know how many, what I want to do is I want to set the last balance row. If it's correct, if we're on the last row, we don't need to copy anything down, just as we did before, right? If I'm here, right, and I'm selecting here, we're on the last row. We don't need to copy anything down. So if the last row is equal to the selected row, we can skip the copy. So if the last result row is equal to the selected row, then go to, and then just call it skip copy invoice. So let's do that, invoice, right? So we don't need that. I'll make sure it's unique. And then write it down here, skip copy invoice, okay, with the colon. So now we can go ahead and copy. So now basically what I want to do is, just as we did before, copy the data below and bring it down however many rows we have invoice. So we can do that with this line of code here. So determining the last row here. And so we need to copy all that data. So we're going to start in column D. Range D and the selected row plus 1, delete, and the selected row plus 1 all the way through K, just as we did before, and the last balance row dot copy. We're copying all the cells, and we're going to paste them. Where are we going to paste them? We're going to paste them in the rows below. Select row. Let's fix that. We need the and right here. So we're going to paste that, where we're going to paste range D and the selected row plus the total rows plus 2, right? Because we got to account for that header too as well. Plus 2 dot paste special, and then Excel paste value. All right, so we're pasting the data, just bring it over. So now what we need to do is just clear the contents of that. So we need to clear contents for 1 for the header row and 2 for the number of rows in there. So basically we know that if our order items database, if we have 2 items, we're going to clear out 3 total rows, 1 for the header and 1 for the rest. Okay, that's however many rows we've already removed it down. So continuing on, so range here, D and the selected row, clearing those numbers out, selected row plus 1, right? Because we want to go the row below, and through K and what? And the selected row plus the total rows plus 1. Total rows plus 1. Dot clear contents, right? We're clearing out those contents. Good, I like that. Let's take a look and see how we are so far on that, just to make sure that we have that. Let's go ahead and refresh the report. Can't execute in break mode. Okay, let's reset those macros. And I also want to make sure that we're already making sure enable events. I'm just going to run that to make sure that events are enabled. Dot range, this is going to be that order items database. You probably saw that. We need to set that database, making sure that we do. Okay, good. So I like that. That looks good. Now let's go ahead and refresh that, reset the break mode. That's important. After we've broken the mode, we need to fix it. Okay, refreshing it. Okay, so now we've got Betty White. We're bringing it down. Okay, now what I want to do is expand there and select on here. All right, let me just adjust one code. I think we need to make this equals, right? Equals expand. That's not, does not equal equals, right? If we're equals it plus, or we're going to equal the row. Okay, let's go ahead and add that, try that again here. Continuing on, let's reset. That's why it's so important when you have that, reset that, and then application enable events. Okay, good. All right, so let's continue on and let's click on there and we'll add that. Okay, so again, we got 1 for the header row and 2 for the results row. Let's double check inside our order data. Betty has an order ID 10. There's 2 items, right? So we want to add in the 3 rows. Okay, so we're perfect. So we've cleared that. We've brought everything else down, which is exactly what we want to. And we've cleared out the appropriate rows. So 1 for the header and 1 for the 2 invoice data. Okay, so the next line of code is to bring in that header row. We're going to start it out. It's going to be right here, starting out right here. Invoice, the item, the total. So we're going to start that out in G, and that's going to come directly from this named range that we've created called invoice header. So let's go ahead and add that inside the code right here. So range G and the selected row plus 1, because that's where the header's row, and through K and the selected row plus 1 also, plus 1 dot value equals, and then it's going to be range invoice header. That's the range we set up, dot value. So let's take a look at that and then we'll refresh and see where we are to that. That looks good. And then we'll set this up, making sure that we have that header up. Perfect. Item, quantity, amount, total. Okay, I like it. It looks very, very good. Let's continue on and then add in those 2 items. All I need to do now is bring these particular items over from our items database and bring them directly into these 2 rows right here. All right, so we're going to do that with the next line of code right here. So range G and the selected row plus 2, right? We're skipping the header row. And here all the way through K, it's going to be and the selected row plus what? Plus the total rows plus 1, plus total rows plus 1, right, for the header row. Dot value is equal to the order item database range. And where's it coming from? It's coming from AC. Let's double check that to make sure we have the right sheet here. Order items database AC3 all the way through AG4, okay, or AG in the last results row. So AC3 through AG and the last result row dot value. Okay, perfect. Okay, so that's going to bring in, those are the invoice items. Okay, good. Now let's take a look at that to see where we are, making sure we are on the right page here. Going back in here, refreshing it one more time here, and then Betty White here, adding that in, and then we're going to do is going to click on this invoice. It's going to add in the header rows. I like it. It looks very, very good. That's just the way I like it. Let's add these in. I like that. That looks really good. So we've got the items. And of course, we're going to add in conditional formatting for these headers. They're going to be colored nicely. Alternating rows are all going to be done. That'll be done once we enter all the data. Okay, that's looking really good. Now the next job is for us, when I click this minus, I want to notice the plus appeared, but I need to clear out all these items. I need to determine how many rows and clear out those items and bring everything back up just like we did with the customers. So we're going to write that in right now. Of course, that we've already written the plus there. So that's it for that. So now what if it's else, what if we're collapsing? We're going to add in the plus. We've already done that. What else do we need to do? We need to clear out the rows below it. So determine the next invoice row. Next invoice row is going to be equal to where? We're going to base it on range E and the selected row, and what else? And all the way through E, and then a large row down, E9999. I want to look for something, dot find. What do I want to find? I want to find basically any type of character, which should be sufficient to help us determine what the next row is. So we're going to use the wildcard for that. And then I want to look in values, values, whole. Okay, and I want to determine the row number. So I'm going to extract the row number for that. That's going to be the next invoice row. Okay, so now that we have the next invoice row, what I want to do is I want to determine if it's the selected row. If, for some reason, the next invoice row equals selected row, that would happen if there was no items in a specific invoice. Selected row, then what we're going to do is simply skip it. Go to no items. No items we're going to write down here. So you can kind of get to see how the pattern is developing, how we kind of do the same thing. So once you get used to it, it's kind of a little bit easier to go through these patterns. Okay, so now that we're skipping it to making sure that we have the selected row, that we have it's not the same, what we want to do is we want to then clear it out, right? So clearing out those contents. But first I want to determine the last balance row and making sure that we have the row selected. I want to know the total number of rows. How many rows do we need to clear out, right? In this case, we're going to clear out, we're going to look for the next, right? We're looking for the next row, right? In this case, it would be 13, right? So we know that we need to clear out 3 rows, right? But I want to make sure if there's no items or just a single item, or if it's the last item, we need to account for that. So I'll explain that in just a moment. So if the next invoice row is equal to the last balance, what if it's the last row? Balance row, then we need to set the last row. Then what we're going to be able to do is determine the total rows is equal to, so basically let's just say we select on, I didn't finish that thought there. Comment that out. I'm going to have to comment. And if, let's close that up. So basically, if it's the last row here, right? If we're on the last row, and I need to determine here. So here we have the items, right? So we need to clear that. Obviously, we're going to clear that up. I need to determine what the last row is to do that. So to do that, we need to update that and determine the last row based on what column. Column G is going to do that. And also we need to account for this, right? We can't have that duplicated on the last row. So we need to account for that too. All right, so that's exactly what we're going to do inside the code right now. Good. And to fix that, let's go ahead and up here. I want to check the last balance row. We're going to check this. If the last result, this should be the last balance row. The last balance row, if that's the selected row, then we can skip the copy, right? Well, we don't want that. Okay, let's take a look at that, update that, refresh that. Okay, James, right? The last balance row, we don't want to copy anything if it's the last row. We just want to expand it. Okay, that's perfect. Probably got no data in there. Okay, so these have data. All right, so I like the way that that's looking. Now what we want to do is expand it, right? So we want to, let's continue down with our code so we can do that. Find, what are we going to find? The next invoice row, right? We got to make sure, just need to add the colon in there so we can determine the last row. Putting that colon in, now what we can do is continue on with the code and if the next invoice row. Okay, so that's looking good. Continue on with our code. So that's what I want to make sure. Determining those total rows. So if the next invoice row equals the last balance row, just like we did here, we need to set the total rows. Those total rows are going to be based on G, column G. So range, what is the last item in column G? That's what I want to know. So 999.end, XLUp.row minus the selected row minus 1. That's going to set the total invoice items. Total invoice items. But what if it's the middle row? So this is only if it's the last row. Let's put in a comment here. Last row. Else it's going to be the middle rows. Else middle rows. So we're going to determine the total rows if it's a middle row. Total rows is going to be based on something else, right? In that case, what we're simply going to do, we know the total rows is going to be based on the next invoice row minus the selected row minus 1. What does that mean here? And that means let's just pull up here. Totals, let's finish the code first, and then I'll explain it. The total rows is simply equal to the next invoice row minus the selected row, minus the selected row -1. Total invoice, because we need to shrink it, right? So we already know the next invoice row is going to be based on this, right? If I've selected, let's continue with our code, resetting that code. And then also what we're going to be doing is making sure that we've enabled events, running this again, just to make sure. Okay, total rows equal, should be an equals, continuing on. All right, so we're going to expand this here. And now what I want to do is I want to expand this here. And we see our items. Okay, so now what we see is when I expand this, I need to determine the next row. We're using that column E, right, to determine the next row. Where's the next character? Assuming that it's not the last row. So this is going to help us determine the total rows. So if we know the next row is 17, right, and we know the selected row is 8, right, we're going to subtract 17 minus 8, giving us 9, and then minus 1. That's going to determine all the rows that we've set in there, which is 8. Okay, so that's how many rows we need to clear out. All right, so continuing on, let's go ahead and continue with that. We can probably, let's left justify this one. It's going to look a little bit better. All right, so continuing on with our code. So we just basically determining how many rows that we're going to clear out. Once we know how many rows we can clear out, we can go ahead and clear it out. So we've got the total rows. So once we know that, we're going to make sure if for some reason the total rows is 0, we're going to go to no items. So if the total rows is equal to, in case there's no invoice items, 0, then go to, let's just call it no items, okay, because we don't want to have any items, right? If there's no items, no items. And then skipping down here, we already got no items. Continuing on, assuming that there are items, we can then move on. The range, G, and, right, the selected row plus 1, right? This is what we're going to clear out. And all the way through K, and how many rows? K, and also the selected row plus the total rows. Selected row plus the total rows. That's what we're going to be clearing out, plus total rows. That's what we're going to clear out. Dot clear contents, clear invoice data and the header row. So once we've cleared it all, I need to bring up the rest of the data. Assuming it's not the last row, we need to bring it up. So how do we know that? If the selected row does not equal the last balance row, then we're going to bring it up. Then bring up everything else. So range, and then D and the selected row plus the total rows plus the total rows plus 1 all the way through K and the last balance row. That's what we're going to copy. Copy. We're going to paste that. Where are we going to paste that in? I'm going to paste that in right to the rows below the selected row. So we can do that. Range D and the selected row plus 1 dot paste special, and then Excel paste values, right? So values is what we want to use to paste that in. So we don't need to paste the formats, okay? Now all I need to do is clear the contents of the last rows. Range D again, and the last balance row minus the total rows plus 1, right? All the way through K, right? Because we're clearing that all out. K, all the way, we can just do a large row all the way down to K99 dot clear remaining copied rows. I like that. And let's clear that up. And we got to have the and sign right here. All right, very good. Let's continue on. Close that and if. Okay, go to no items. All right, and then no data. And make sure we enable events. Okay, everything. And also, again, once I want to select range F3, select something else, dot select. Let's take a look at that. Saving our work, going to our favorite, refreshing it, starting from scratch again, going into Betty. Okay, and now we see that Betty here. We're going to select on that. We've got the items that show. Clicking on that again, it's going to collapse it. Clicking on this is going to show it. All right, I like the way that looks. 3 items here and then collapsing that. All right, that looks really good. So we've got our collapse. That's pretty good. And let's go ahead and put in some conditional formatting. So basically what I want to do now is when I select on a particular invoice, I want to show a preview of that invoice. I want that selected row to show up. And I want also a little icon here that we saw earlier, which will be is still available here, right? It's in our selection here. It's show all, right? You can see it here. It's right here. So what I want to do is I want to show this little icon right about here on the same row. And this is going to allow us to go to the invoice as you saw in the sample. So that's what we're going to write, just a little bit of code. But let's go ahead and add in some additional formatting. I want to make it look really nice. So let's refresh this. And what I want to do is basically I want to add some alternating row conditional formatting for here. So we're going to go into, let's go ahead and drop this down. We'll be working with conditional formatting just for a bit. And then we'll go into conditional formatting. I'm going to manage the rules. There should be no rules now. And we're going to add some rules. So it's going to be based on some conditions, right? So what I want to do is I want to add rows, alternating row conditions. So we're going to click on new rule. and it's going to be based on a few conditions. So one, I want to color alternating rows based on if there's a value in column D. So and then I want to check to see if D, right, and any row associated starting at row 6. So we're going to read that does not equal empty, and it's also going to be for even rows. So we're going to do even rows. That's mod row to even. So for even rows, I'm going to give it a little bit of a format and a little bit of a border. So the color is going to be, let's go ahead and add some fill effects here. We can give it this color here. This is our main color here. This is what we're using, right? But we can use a little bit a lighter color here, a little bit lighter color here, and then we can alternate that between white. So clicking OK. And then I want to give it a little bit of a border, maybe just a top and bottom border using a relatively light color, but we'll go a dotted line just like this, above and below. It's very, very slight, but that's okay. That's exactly what I want. And clicking OK. What I'm going to use, I'm going to copy this because I also want to do the odd rows. So I'm going to click OK. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do one more new rule. I'm going to use a format, and I'm going to paste that in there, except this is going to be for odd rows. So I'm going to do this 1. And I'm going to format this, and then I'm going to give this a fill color of probably just white or something like that. And then I'm going to give it that same border color that we used. I want the same border, which is going to be this border right here. Also the dotted line on the top and the bottom, and click OK. All right, so it's the same rule, and then I'm going to just applies to, I want that applies to for a large row, so we'll do 999, and we'll do the same thing here, applies to 999. All right, let's edit this. Microsoft added some quotes around that we are not helpful. We don't need those, so we'll clear that out, and we'll do the same thing here in case it didn't see that as a formula. It does now. All right, so apply that. That looks good. I like the way that looks. Very good. So we see we've got our custom amounts, right, looking pretty good. Now when I expand that, what I want to do is I want to add, let's do the Betty White. She's got a few less. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to add in some conditional formatting for this invoice header, only for this row. So what's unique about this row? Well, it says invoice number, right? So that's pretty unique, right? So, and that's going to be in column F. So let's take a look at that. Let's add in some conditional formatting for that. So we're going to go back into the manage rules, and we're going to create a new rule, and this is going to be based on what column? It's going to be based on column F. So I'm just going to select the first possible column. Let's just select F6, but of course it's going to be for every row down. 6 is going to be equal to, and then in quotes, I'm going to paste in that invoice number. If it is equal to that, I'm going to set a format. We're going to go with a fill effects here. And actually, we'll just do, fill effects will work just fine. Give it a nice color, and I'll give it these 2 colors here, which is going to be this one and this color here. So I like that. That looks good. Click OK. It'll also make it bold, right? And then we'll do a border. I'll do a solid border, maybe a little bit darker than we've been doing. So we're going to do this solid border, darker here, top and bottom. And then I'm going to give it the font of bold, okay? Clicking OK. And I want to make sure that that's going to apply to correctly. So that's going to apply to, let's shrink this down. We don't need it so big. It's going to apply to basically everything between, let's click here, clear that out. And just want to make sure that we're going to probably cover this column all the way down here. Actually, I'm going to cover just E. I think we'll go with F, column F. So I'm just going to color F. So, and then all the way down to a large row. So making sure we cover that, 999. Apply that, making sure that looks correct. Okay, let's take a look at that. Yeah, that looks quite nice. I like that, and click OK. Okay, so we've got our, it's going to be based on that. So anytime we add that, if I select another person, right, we see that invoice data. All right, so that looks good. But now what I want to do is I want to alternate rows inside the invoice. I also want to color these rows. And I'm thinking about coloring this one perhaps, but not, I don't think so. We'll just do this here from F all the way through K. I want to make sure that we have actually added headers. We're also going to add in headers for this too. Let's go ahead and do that right now. Headers and then inside rows. Okay, so let's go ahead and do conditional formatting and manage those rules. And we're going to continue with our invoice numbers here. Invoice numbers. How do we differ invoice numbers? Well, I'm going to create a new rule. I'm going to use a format to do that, right? And I want to make sure that there's values, right? If there's only a value inside column F, then we know it is invoice data because customers are located in column E. So column F, right? We select in column F, starting in row 6 is sufficient. That's fine. And then what I want to see does not equal empty. Okay, if it does not equal empty, but I also, since this is for the invoice data, we want both odd and even rows, right? So we want to color them slightly differently. So it's going to be 2 rules, and we're going to use the and for that. And F6 does not equal empty. And then also what I want to do is mod, right? I want to do mod rows. Even rows, I want to color those even rows. And we're going to use a little bit of similar format. So we're going to use the fill, right? And then what I'll do is I'll use the fill effects, and we'll use a similar color like just this color here and this color here, which is a little bit darker, almost the same, right? It's not much of a difference. And then also another, giving it some borders, right? Some similar border colors that we've been using. And then I'll use the dotted line here on the top and just the bottom here, okay? All right, so I want to copy this because that's only for the even rows, clicking OK. And then what we'll do is we'll just click the apply to. Actually, I'll add the new rule in first for the odd rows, right? So we're going to paste that in there. This is going to be for the odd rows. And I'm going to give it a format of white. We'll use the font. Let's go ahead, the fill of white. And we'll use the same borders here. Border on the same color. And then, of course, the dotted line is going to be on the top and the bottom, right? So it's very, very similar. And then clicking OK. So now what I want to do is applies to, but I just didn't want to. All right, so we can do 999 and then 999. Okay, so that's sufficient. Clicking apply to, and then we'll take a look at that to see how that looks. Okay, all right, I like that. We need to make sure it applies to all the way to column K. So we're going to manage that, making sure that it goes all the way, not just to column H, but all the way to column K. Okay, that's what I need to make sure of. I like that very well. That looks good. So also the invoice, right? We need to update that. That's not correct. So going into conditional formatting, manage rules, we need to make sure that we're all the way on that invoice F6 all the way to, regardless of the row, right? We want to make sure that it extends all the way across. And so we want to make sure that this rule supersedes the other rules, right? So if we go ahead and we bring it above, right? Bringing it above to the top and clicking apply, we see that now it supersedes the other rules, right? So now it's covered, right? Here you see it's covered all the way. Okay, good. I like that. So now what we want to do is we want to add in something for item, right? What if G contains the word item? So let's add a new rule for that. Use a formula. And this is going to be based on, let's start out with G6. That's sufficient here. G6 is going to equal the word item. If that is it, we know it's also hetero because it's the item. So G6 is equal to the word item. We also want to give it a similar header color that we did before. So we're going to format that. We're going to give it a fill effects, right? We're going to use the same color format that we did before. And we're also going to use the bold font, and we're also going to use the borders, right? So a solid border, just as we did before, probably this border above and below, and also the font would be bold. Clicking OK. And we want to make sure that that applies to everything. So we want to apply all the way from, right? Let's just set that applies to. It's going to be applies to all the way from, let's say, G all the way through K, and then down to many rows. Okay, let's take a look. Make sure it's row 9999, just as we did there. Okay, clicking apply and clicking OK. All right, so now we see we have our item headers set up here just the way we like them. Now all we need to do is make sure that we're color coordinating our items inside, right, and directly inside our items. We want to make sure those have alternating colors, maybe slightly different. All right, good. We'll make adjustments. I want to color these rows as well. I want to make sure that our invoices are colored all the way to column E. And I also want to make sure our individual items for our invoices are colored. So we're going to extend this, making sure that it's extended to E and E, making sure that that is happening there. And then all we're going to do is just to make sure it extends out. Now what I want to do is I want to color those individual items. So what type of rule can we assume for those items? We see that G has a value, but F doesn't. So let's go ahead and add that in, right? That's going to be our rule. So here we're going to see it's going to be and, right? We know that G contains a value, right? G and any row associated with it, starting in, we'll just go with row 6 to keep it even. 6 does not equal empty. We also know that F does contain empty, right? F6, let's just use F6 is equal to empty, because we know that those are only for invoice items, equals empty. And also we want to also color alternating rows. So we're going to use 3 conditions on this and. All right, so we're going to cover that for even rows. So G6 does not equal empty, F6 equals empty, and then meaning any row down associated with that. Copying that, I'm going to format that. I'm going to give it, again, another little bit of a fill effect, but this time I want just a little bit of a different color here. And so we'll use a little bit of a lighter variation here, very slight, right? Very slight. And then what we want to do is I want to make sure that this also has a little bit of a border color on it, just so we can differentiate between the borders on these, a top and a bottom border. Clicking OK and clicking OK on that. And then also I want to make sure that that's going to apply to, where's that going to apply? Let's edit that rule. That usually means and, right? We certainly don't want those quotes in there. That's not going to help us. Okay, so edit this here. We can get rid of that. We can get rid of this here. Okay, and one more. Now that we got this one, we're going to do one more, right? I'm going to click OK, and then a new rule, one more. And then we're going to paste, this one's going to be for odd rows. So, oops, let's go ahead and copy that. We don't want to rewrite that rule. Okay, edit that rule. Okay, OK, OK. Okay, adding one more rule for those items, and this is going to be for the odd rows. So all we need to do, we've already copied it, all we need to do is just change this to the 1. Okay, and then all we do want to update that we're going to give it a fill of white. I don't want to give it a border, very, very similar to what we did before, giving that top and bottom dotted lines. And all right, that looks good. Let's take a look at that. We also want to make sure that, again, our rules, our header rules take precedence. So we're going to move those up to the top, right? We want to make sure that those are up on the top because they take precedence. Clicking apply and clicking OK. We want to make sure that it applies to, these have to apply to the same, right? Let's double check these, and these also have to apply to the same. So we're going to update that to copying this applies to, because this is the one, and making sure that they apply to the same cells. Clicking apply, okay? And then also we need to update this. Notice how that it changed those numbers, which we certainly don't want. Back to 6 here, right, which is our header rows, and also back to 6 here, keeping that consistent. Okay, clicking OK, and then apply. All right, and it's going to do the same thing for this one, right? Sometimes it'll change it, not fun, but that's, you kind of keep an eye and recognize that we have to keep the consistent rows. Excel likes to update those even without my willingness. Clicking OK. All right, that looks quite nice. Let's take a look at that. All right, I like the way that that is looking really now. And we'll refresh that and see where we go. All right, so we've got Jackie here. Okay, taking a look at here, this invoice number, we need to update those. I want to make sure that those invoice notices is updating, but this one is not. We still have a conditional formatting to update here. So let's update that one right now, probably just a case of the applies to, making sure, notice how the applies to moved. Again, we need to have everything consistent, starting at row 6, making sure that it applies to always the same. When you remember, and when you change it here, it's going to tend to change it here too. So when you apply it, you got to change it both. Notice how it changed back to F1. I know it's kind of like keep going back and forth on this because it tends to change. Clicking OK and clicking OK here and then updating that, right? We want all those rows consistently with the same. Clicking apply. So everything starts out in row 6, it applies to, and all the formulas are looking good, just the way we want them to. Clicking OK. All right, and let's take a look at that. That looks nice. I like the way that that looks. We can minimize that, maximize that, right? Probably we may or may not wish to do on this row or not, probably not. And then let's go ahead and click here and okay, that looks really nice. So we've got alternating row colors, very good. Now when I select on an invoice, I want to make sure, I would say that this invoices probably would go to here and not G. So I'm going to make this F, right? I don't want to color this. I just want to color all the way to column F. So let's update that. That's going to be for the invoice number. So we're going to go into conditional formatting, manage rules, right? We don't want it on E, we do want it on F. So that is going to be for these ones right here. And so this is going to be updated to F. And I also want to know the selected row. When I select a row, I want to highlight that row as well. Okay, clicking apply. Good, that's what I wanted. That's exactly what I want. I want that gradient in there. So let's go ahead and add a new row for the selected row. And I'll put that in, let's say, any particular row. So I'll put that in the selected row. Let's just choose one up here, B5 equals the row, and then double parentheses. I'm going to format that very unique. So we're going to go into the fill because I want to know when we select an invoice, I want to know which one it is. So going to fill that. And we'll give it a fill effects, maybe it's a darker color, right? So we'll use the same dark colored theme, but in this case, we're going to give it a white font and a bold. So the font is going to be bold and it's going to be white, and that's only when the rows. Now the selection change event is going to trigger that, and that's going to be based on B5, and click OK, and that's going to be the top one. We want that as our top priority, right? So that way when this, let's say we select this invoice here under 8, we change this to 8, and we see that that's automatically colored, but we want to make sure it applies all the way across. So we want to manage those rules, and we need to apply to, of course, that's going to have to be applied all the way, starting right in column F and going all the way to K. So we can copy this one and paste it right down here, okay? And also, again, we want to make sure that we update it so that we have all the data accordingly. And clicking OK. All right, I like the way that looks. It colors all the rows. So when we select it, now this the selection change event, that's going to trigger. So we're going to call this selected row. So when we make a selection only to an invoice, not an invoice item, not a customer, but only an invoice, do I then want to take the selected row and place it directly in B5. And I also, when I change this, I would like to automatically change the dates in here. But the important thing to know is this particular range, I want to know what row inside the admin screen it is associated with. For example, this is row 15, 16, right? So how would I know that, right? Well, I can use the match, right? So we know that this is called date range. It's called date range. So if I match it and I get a result of 1 for this month and I add 14 to that, I know I'm going to get this month. So I want to know that this month is on row 15, and I can use the match to do that. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to put it in right here. We're going to call this date range row, okay? So it's going to be equal to, if there's an error, I want to show blank, matching. What am I matching? I'm going to look up this particular item, right? I'm going to look it up inside the date range, named range here. I want an exact match, but I also want to add 14 on that because I want to know the row. So we're adding 14. If it's an error, I'm going to show empty. Okay, so that's going to get us row 15, right? And that's exactly what I want, right? I want to know that this month is on row 15. That's going to help us in the code. That way I know when a user makes a change to here, all I need to do is look to B3, and that's going to determine what row that I pulled it from and what row that I pull the two dates together with, okay? So that will help us out. All right, so now that we have that, we can go in the code. We're going to do a few things. One, if I change it, I need to, one, change these two dates and automatically refresh it. Another one thing we need to do is when we make a selection change on any invoice, making sure that there's an invoice, I want a picture of the invoice to appear here on the right, and I want that icon to appear on the left. So we want to make sure that that view invoice button appears on the left. So where's that shape? We can use the selection, show all. We have it right here. That's the one, and that's called view invoice button. So I'm going to copy that name. Now I only want that if I select anything else, I want it to be hidden, right? So if I select here, I want it to be hidden. So the first thing we're going to do is on the selection change event, we're going to check to see if it's visible. If, let's say, shapes view invoice dot visible equals true, then we're going to hide it, right? So then all I need to do is just simply hide it. So we're going to copy this, then dot visible equals, and so false, okay? So we just need to make sure it's false. Okay, so if it's visible, hide it always. Okay, however, what I want to do is I want to display that. And that, when do we want to display that? When a user makes a selection change. So we're going to go all the way down here, and then it's going to pick on invoice selection. Okay, so when when are they going to select? Well, they're going to select basically anything between F at 6, all the way through K and down. But we want to make sure that F contains a value. If F contains a value, that is going to be the invoice number. So we can do that here. So if not intersection, so it's going to be all the way from, let's just call it F7 or F8, either way, through all the way through K and then a larger row, 99. And another condition, we want to make sure that F contains a value, and F and the target row dot value does not equal empty. Then we want to do something. Well, what do we want to do? The first thing I want to do is set that target row. So range B5 dot value equals target dot row. Okay, we can also set the selected row equals target dot row. So the selected row, now what I want to do is I want to focus on the shape. I want that shape to be displayed. So with that shape, where are we going to display it? Dot left position. I'm going to set that left position. Where do we want? Probably in column E. So equals range E and the selected row dot left, maybe move it over a little bit, plus 5, maybe 5 pixels. Dot top, I want that top position to equal to range. Also E and the selected row, and that's going to be the top position. Last thing, I want to make sure it's visible. So dot visible equals MSO true. Okay, so that is going to make sure that we show up every time we collect an invoice. One, it's going to highlight the row. Two, it's going to be display, so far at least, it is going to display that icon. So let's go ahead and select here, here, and here. When we select a customer, nothing happens. Good, that's what I want. When I select an invoice item here, nothing happens. That's what I want. I only want to know the specific rows. And probably notice when we expand it, we should probably clear that row out as well, right? If I expand something, we should really clear out B5 should be cleared out. When we refresh, we should also clear out B5. So let's go ahead and add that in here. So we do clear contents out when we refresh the code here. So let's go ahead and enter the customer balance Mac, right? Adding in B5 here, that would be when we refresh it. We don't want to clear that out. Also, what we want to do back inside the customer dashboard, when we select on anyone, if we intersect, right, select anything else other than that, we should clear it out, right? So also here, range B5, I want to clear that, dot clear contents. Okay, so I want to clear that out regardless if we select, only when we select invoice do I want that to show up. Also on here, right, if we select any item, right, on invoice, not here, invoice selection is fine. Column E is okay, is sufficient, but let's take a look. Probably not an individual invoice, so probably clear it out here as well. Only the individual invoice. That's a little bit more accurate, so we want that. All right, good. So now what we have is, now we refresh it, it's going to be, that selected row is going to be cleared out, right? I like that. It's not going to show up. Only when we select an individual invoice do we have that. What I'd also like to do is I'd also like that invoice number, that picture of that invoice, a little preview, to show up on the right side. Okay, so how are we going to do that? We know it's invoice number 8. Now, if we go into the orders here and we go into, since we search order and we click 8, we can see that it's automatically going to load up 8. So to do that, to run that macro, all we need to do is get D8 to contain that order number. Okay, so that's what we're going to do right now. So let's continue in the code. So let's first load that up. Okay, so range, so let's go back in the orders.range. D8.value is equal to what? Range here, F, that's where it is, and the selected row dot value. That's going to be set invoice number to load. Okay, let's just double check to make sure that that's working, right? If I select an invoice, going back in the customer balance, if I select on invoice number 9, I want that to load up automatically inside our orders. So going into the orders, and we see that it has loaded up. That looks great. But what I want is I want a little bit of a picture of this invoice. And we can use the camera tool to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the camera tool. If you don't have it here, you can add it in the more commands. Just look for the camera tool and add it to your shortcuts. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the camera tool. And so I'm going to click on the camera tool. I'm just going to click on any cell for now after I click the camera tool. And then what I want to do is I'm going to highlight this and I'm going to select all the cells that I want this to be part of, right? So I'm going to highlight that and I want it to be all of this. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do, and I'm going to hit enter. What that's going to do is going to create this little invoice here. Okay, and that's exactly what I want. So don't worry about the duplicate. It looks just, I'm going to Control X, delete it. I'm going to go into the customer balance and I'm going to paste it directly in here. So I'm going to give this a very specific name. We're going to call this invoice INV PR preview. Okay, so that's the name of the shape that we're going to do. And I can give it a little bit of shadow if I want to. So we can do a picture format, give it a little bit of a shadow. Okay, that looks kind of nice. Okay, we can also shrink it down. We don't need it that big, so we can shrink it down a little bit if we like. And so what I want to do is when I select on invoice, I want it to appear right here. So how are we going to do that? Well, first thing is when we select anything, I want this to be hidden, right? I don't want this to be shown up. When I select something, I want it to be hidden. If I select on an invoice, I want it to appear here. So again, the first thing, just like we did the shapes, on selection change of anything, I want to hide it if it's visible. So if shapes here, and then I'm going to invoice preview dot visible equals true, then hide it. Then shapes dot visible equals false. Okay, equals false. Okay, so we're going to hide it no matter what. So now as soon as I select on something, it's gone. Perfect. It's there, but it's just gone. Okay, I only want it to display when I select on something. So when I select on an invoice, then I want it displayed. So let's make that happen, right? When we select on an invoice, we've already got something to happen here. Let's just continue with this code. So this time with shapes, but now we're dealing with a different shape. This is the shape we're dealing with. I'm going to set that left position. Left position is going to be equal to, let's go with column L, range L, and the selected row dot left, and move it a little bit over, maybe 2 pixels. And then also the top position is also going to be equal to L, range L, and the selected row dot top. Okay, and also making that visible. dot visible equals MSO true. All right, good. So I like that. That's all we need to do to get that preview to display. Perfect. Going to save that, saving our work. And then what we're going to do is we're going to come over here. We're going to select a row and we're going to make sure that, there we go. It looks preview. 8580, invoice number 9. Let's take a look at invoice number 4. That previews. That looks really nice. I like the way that that looks. Invoice number 4, the total's 36169. Payments are 400. Everything looks really nice. The last thing we need to do before I let you go is when I click this, I want to go to the order screen and have it displayed. Well, that's very simple. All we need to do is just activate that. So what we're going to do is going to go back into the customer balance macros, that customer, the word. I'm going to write one more macro. We're just going to call it go to invoice, right? Something very simple. Sub, let's just go customer balance. I like to call this sheet go to invoice. It's better for larger projects. And all we need to do is activate.orders.activate. Okay, that's it. All we need. Then I'm just going to copy the name of this macro. That's easiest. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select invoice, right click this button here, assign the macro, pasting that in here, clicking OK. All right, now when I want to go to it, selecting here, it's going to go directly to that. Let's do that one more time. It was super fast. Selecting invoice number 4, going to that, and it's going to go directly to it. Wow. Awesome. In this training, oh, we got one more thing to do. I almost forgot. On a worksheet change, on F3 change event, we need to update the dates. Almost forgot. And then we need to refresh it. Okay, that's very, very simple. Let's get that done right now. And that's going to be on our customer balances here. And that's going to be on a worksheet change, right? Worksheet change event, right? So it's not selection change, but it's worksheet change event. When we make a change to F3, we want something to happen, right? Okay, so if not, in F3, let's take a look at that. F3 is when we want to make the change. We want to make sure that F3 is not empty, and range F3 dot value does not equal empty. And we want to make sure one more thing, and range, what else? We want to make sure that the row that's associated with this is not empty. That's B3. We want to make sure B3 is also not empty, and range B3 dot value does not equal empty. Then do a few things. Then, all right, what are we going to do? Well, the first thing what I want to do is I want to add that from date in. Range I3 dot value equals what? Equals the admin dot range. We can add in probably a variable here, a little bit easier. Let's just call it date range row. Okay, so we'll dimension that as long. Dimension, it's a little bit easier to read as long. Okay, let's see, date range row. Let's see. Okay, we'll dimension the date range row as long. Okay, I like that. And then what we'll do is we'll set that row. That row is going to be based on B3. So we're going to set that date range row is equal to range B3. That's the variable set. That's the row dot value. We've already set that row up. So admin, what is our from column? Let's look in our admin. Our from column is column Q, while our to column is column S. So it's Q and S are the two columns. So Q and the date range row, it's kind of a long variable, dot value, okay, don't forget the end quotes here. That's going to be our from date, so let's put that in, from date. And then we want range, where is our going to be coming from, going directly into K3. So K3 is our to date, so let's go ahead and add that in right now. So K2 through dot value equals admin dot range. You could just do, I should have just copied, and, right, date range row dot value. And that's going to be our to date. Good. Let's just take a look at that. So when I make a change to this year or last month or something, it automatically changes. Good. I like that. This year. Good. So the last thing, all I need to do is just to add the macro that's automatically going to update the report. That's called customer balances refresh. We're going to put that inside there, right inside the next line of code right here. So that's all we need to happen. Okay, saving our work as we always do. And then after that, all we need to do is just double click or make the change this month, right? Taking a look at that, that refreshes it. Last month, that looks good. And we'll go back to this year. All right, cool. We are now done. It's been an incredible training to double drill down. We're able to drill down on customers, drill down on individual invoices. We're able to select invoices, preview invoices on a single click, and go to the invoices. It's been all done from scratch. I hope you appreciated this. Don't forget, if you do like these trainings, a great way to support this channel is with the incredible 250 workbook template pack. That is an amazing price. price. So I do appreciate if you grab that. I'll include the links down below, or any of the courses that you might. We got an incredible dashboard course, a mentorship course that will help you build and sell your own Excel-based applications. Thank you much for your continued support, and we'll see you next time.